Inside the stifling walls of the Presidio County Courthouse, Judge Arthur Mulholland and Officer Greg Kowalski shared an arrogant smirk, convinced Mrs. Beatrice Washington was powerless. To them, she was just a lonely, elderly woman they could bully into prison for a crime she didn't commit. But they made a fatal calculation. They didn't check her background. The man stepping out of the black government SUV outside isn't just a son. He is a section chief for the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. He is about to turn their courtroom into a crime scene. Watch until the end, because the karma that hits these corrupt officials is satisfying, brutal, and 100% earned. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B had been broken for 3 days, but the stifling heat didn't seem to bother Judge Arthur Mulholland. He sat high upon his bench, his robe unzipped slightly at the top, looking down at the defendant's table with the bored expression of a man who had already decided the verdict before the gavel even banged. Beatrice Washington sat alone. She was 68 years old, dressed in her Sunday best, a floral dress that had seen better decades, pressed meticulously to hide the fraying hem. Her hands, calloused from 40 years of scrubbing floors at the Mercy General Hospital, shook violently in her lap. She clutched a crumpled tissue, her eyes darting between the prosecutor, a slick-haired man named Thomas Reed, and the witnessing officer, Greg Kowalski. Kowalski was leaning back in the witness chair, chewing on the end of a pen. He was a large man, the kind whose muscle had long since turned to bulk, with a buzz cut that did little to hide the redness of his neck. He looked comfortable. Too comfortable. "So, Officer Kowalski," Prosecutor Reed said, his voice dripping with false patience. "You stated that when you approached the vehicle, Mrs. Washington became belligerent?" Kowalski smirked. It was a subtle twitch of the lip, but Beatrice saw it. "That's right. She started screaming about her rights. Said she didn't have to show me ID. Then I saw the baggie on the passenger seat." "Liar!" Beatrice gasped, her voice cracking. "I never screamed. I asked why you stopped me." "Order!" Judge Mulholland barked, though he didn't look angry. He looked amused. He peered over his spectacles at Beatrice. "Mrs. Washington, another outburst like that, and I'll hold you in contempt. Let the officer speak. He's doing his job protecting this community." A ripple of laughter went through the back of the courtroom. It was filled with off-duty officers, Kowalski's buddies, there to watch the show. To them, this was sport. Beatrice was just the ball they were kicking around. "She was erratic, Your Honor," Kowalski continued, his eyes locking with Beatrice's, daring her to speak again. Classic signs of someone under the influence or trafficking. When I asked her to step out, she swung at me. "I have arthritis," Beatrice sobbed, the tears finally spilling over. "I can't even lift my arm past my shoulder. How could I swing at you?" Judge Mulholland sighed, a long, exaggerated sound that echoed in the silent room. He picked up a file and dropped it, the thud sounding like a gunshot. "The officer's report is detailed, Mrs. Washington, and frankly, your public defender seems to have nothing to refute it." Beatrice looked at the young man beside her. His name was Mr. Pinsky, and he looked like he was 12 years old. He hadn't objected once. He was scrolling on his phone under the table. "Mr. Pinsky?" the judge asked. "No questions, Your Honor," Pinsky mumbled, not even standing up. "See?" Kowalski laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Even your lawyer knows you're cooked." The gallery erupted in snickers again. Kowalski winked at the court reporter. The bailiff, a man named Deputy Miller, covered his mouth to hide a grin. They were laughing at her. They were laughing at her fear, her poverty, her absolute helplessness against a machine designed to crush her. Beatrice felt a cold pit in her stomach. It wasn't just fear. It was the realization of erasure. She had lived a good life. She paid her taxes. She went to church. She raised her boy. And now, these men were going to take her freedom away over a lie, simply because they could. Because they needed an arrest stat. Because she was a black woman in a county that didn't like her kind driving through their nice neighborhoods. "We'll recess for lunch," Judge Mulholland announced, checking his gold watch. "I'm hungry. When we come back, I'll deliver the sentencing. I suggest you prepare yourself for custody, Mrs. Washington." "Please," Beatrice whispered. "I need to call my son. You didn't let me call him." Judge Mulholland paused, half standing. He looked at Kowalski, and they shared a look, an inside joke. "Your son?" The judge chuckled. "Let me guess. He's busy? Or maybe he's locked up, too." "Probably in the system already," Kowalski quipped. "Apple doesn't fall far, right?" The laughter was louder this time. Open, unashamed. Beatrice stiffened. She wiped her face. The trembling in her hands stopped. She looked up at the judge, her eyes suddenly clear and sharp. "My son is working," she said quietly. "But he's coming." "Sure he is." The judge waved a dismissive hand. "Bailiff, keep her here during recess. Don't let her clutter up the hallway." They walked out, leaving her alone in the wooden chair. Beatrice took a deep breath. They didn't know. They hadn't let her access her phone since the arrest 3 days ago. They hadn't let her make her one call. But she knew her boy. He had a tracker on her car. He checked in every Sunday at 9 or 4 a.m. It was Tuesday. He would have noticed she was gone. She closed her eyes and prayed. "Lord, forgive these men, for they are about to be destroyed." 3 days earlier, the nightmare had begun on a stretch of Route 9, just outside the wealthy enclave of Oak Creek. Beatrice had been driving her 2018 Toyota Camry. It was a sensible car, kept immaculate. She was on her way to deliver a homemade peach cobbler to a sick friend from her choir. The speed limit was 45. Beatrice was doing 43. She saw the lights in her rearview mirror before she heard the siren. Her heart did the little jump it always did when police were around, a conditioned response from decades of watching the news, seeing what happened to people who looked like her. But she remained calm. She pulled over to the shoulder, turned off the engine, and placed her hands on the top of the steering wheel, just like her son, Tobias, had taught her. 10 and 2, Mama. Fingers open. Don't reach for anything until they tell you. Officer Greg Kowalski didn't approach the window immediately. He sat in his cruiser for 5 minutes. It was a power move, a tactic to build anxiety. When he finally walked up, he didn't come to the window. He stood by the B-pillar, out of her sight line. Beatrice waited. She didn't turn her head. Finally, he tapped the glass with his baton, hard. She rolled the window down. "Good afternoon, officer. Was I speeding?" "License and registration," Kowalski said. No greeting, no explanation. He was wearing mirrored sunglasses, though it was an overcast day. "It's in my purse on the passenger seat," she said, narrating her movements. "I am going to reach for it now." "Just get it," he snapped. She handed over the documents. He snatched them, glancing at the name. "Beatrice Washington? You from around here, Beatrice?" "I live in the city," she said politely. "I'm visiting a friend." "In Oak Creek?" He scoffed. "A friend. Right. Step out of the car." "Why?" Beatrice asked, her pulse quickening. "I haven't done anything wrong." "I smell marijuana," Kowalski lied. It was practiced, smooth, the universal excuse to bypass the Fourth Amendment. "I don't smoke," Beatrice said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm a deaconess at First Baptist. Step out of the car." His hand dropped to his holster. Beatrice obeyed. She got out slowly, wincing as her arthritis flared in her hip. As soon as she was clear of the door, Kowalski spun her around and shoved her against the hood. The metal was hot from the engine. "Hey!" she cried out. "You're hurting me!" "Stop resisting!" he yelled, playing to the dashcam. He kicked her legs apart. "Spread 'em!" He cuffed her, the metal biting into her thin wrists. Then he left her leaning against the car while he rummaged through her vehicle. Beatrice watched helplessly as he threw her Bible onto the floorboard, ripped open the glove box, and dug through her purse. Then she saw it. It was so fast, if she hadn't been watching, she would have missed it. Kowalski reached into his own vest pocket. He pulled out a small plastic baggie with white powder. He dropped it onto the passenger seat, right on top of her choir robe. "What is that?" Beatrice screamed. "That's not mine. I saw you." Kowalski turned, the baggie now discovered. He held it up to his body cam. "Well, look at this. Possession with intent. Looks like cocaine, Beatrice. You selling to the rich kids out here? You planted that? You put that there?" She was hyperventilating now. "I want your supervisor. I want a lawyer." "You'll get a cell," Kowalski said, grabbing her by the arm and dragging her toward his cruiser. "And nobody is going to believe a word you say. It's my word against yours, and I'm the one with the badge." He shoved her into the back seat. It smelled of stale vomit and disinfectant. As he drove her to the station, he turned up the radio, drowning out her pleas to call her son. At the station, the dehumanization continued. Fingerprints, mugshot. They took her purse, her phone, her dignity. When she asked for her phone call, the desk sergeant, a man named Miller, who would later be the bailiff in court, just laughed. "Phones are down, sweetie. Try again tomorrow." They threw her in a holding cell with a woman coming down off heroin. Beatrice sat on the concrete bench, shivering, praying. She knew Tobias would be looking for her, but Tobias was undercover. He was on a long-term assignment in Chicago. Or at least, that's what he had told her last week. She didn't know if he could hear her prayers, but she kept praying them anyway. "Tobias, if you can feel this, Mama needs you. Come home." Back in the courtroom, the memory faded as the heavy oak doors swung open. Lunch was over. The wolves were back, and they were ready to finish their meal. The courtroom filled up again. The atmosphere was heavier, the heat more oppressive. Judge Mulholland returned, looking satisfied, a coffee stain on his tie. He didn't even look at Beatrice. He looked at the clock. "All right, let's wrap this up," Mulholland said, picking up his gavel. "Mr. Reed, closing arguments." Thomas Reed stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. The defendant was stopped for erratic driving. Narcotics were found in plain view. The officer's testimony is unimpeachable. We ask for the maximum sentence to send a message that drug traffickers are not welcome in Presidio County." "Mr. Pinsky?" The public defender stood up halfway. "We ask for leniency, Your Honor. She has no priors." That was it. That was the defense. Mulholland nodded. "Stand up, Mrs. Washington." Beatrice stood. Her legs felt like lead. "Beatrice Washington," the judge began, his voice booming. "You have come into this court and shown zero remorse. You have accused a decorated officer of the law of fabricating evidence. This court takes a dim view of those who refuse to take responsibility. I find you guilty on all counts." Beatrice gasped. The room spun. "I am sentencing you to 5 years in the state penitentiary," Mulholland said, the words striking her like physical blows. "With immediate remand. Bail is revoked." "No!" Beatrice cried out. "Please, I'm innocent." "Take her away," Mulholland said, waving his hand. Officer Kowalski moved toward her, unhooking the handcuffs from his belt. He was grinning. "Told you," he whispered as he grabbed her arm. "Nobody cares." Beatrice looked around the room. The court reporter was typing. The bailiff was yawning. The other officers were checking their phones. It was the banality of evil in its purest form. They were destroying a life, and it was just a Tuesday afternoon to them. Kowalski twisted her arm behind her back, harder than necessary. "Let's go, Grandma." Suddenly, a sound cut through the murmuring of the courtroom. Boom! It wasn't a gun. It was the double doors at the back of the courtroom flying open. They hit the walls with such force that the wood splintered. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a man. He was tall, 6'4", built like a linebacker, but dressed in a suit that cost more than Judge Mulholland's car. He wore dark sunglasses, which he slowly removed, revealing eyes that burned with a terrifying cold fury. Behind him stood 4 other men and women, all wearing navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow letters, FBI. But the man in the front didn't wear a windbreaker. He wore a badge on his belt that gleamed under the courtroom lights. He walked down the center aisle, his dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the floor. The silence was absolute. Officer Kowalski froze, his hand still on Beatrice's arm. Judge Mulholland banged his gavel. "Excuse me, who do you think you are barging into my courtroom? Bailiff, remove these people." The man ignored the judge. He didn't even look at him. He walked straight to the defense table, past the trembling public defender, and stopped 3 feet from Kowalski. He looked at Kowalski's hand, gripping Beatrice's arm. Then he looked at Kowalski's face. "Take your filthy hands off my mother," the man said. His voice wasn't loud. It was low, deep, and vibrated with the threat of immediate, catastrophic violence. Kowalski blinked, confused. "Excuse me? You can't be back here. This is a restricted area." The man reached into his jacket pocket. Deputy Miller, the bailiff, reached for his gun. "Don't even think about it," one of the agents behind the man shouted, raising an assault rifle that had been slung at his side. "Federal agents, hands where we can see them." The man in the suit pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. The gold badge inside was different from the local police badges. It was intricate, heavy. "I am Special Agent in Charge Tobias Washington," he announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "Head of the FBI Public Corruption Task Force. And as of this moment, this courtroom is under federal jurisdiction." Judge Mulholland stood up, his face turning purple. "You have no authority here. This is a state court. Get out before I have you arrested." Tobias finally turned his gaze to the judge. It was a look of pure predator staring at prey. "Arthur Mulholland," Tobias said, naming him without a title. "You've been under surveillance for 6 months. We have your bank records. We have your wire transfers from the private prison kickback scheme. And we have the audio from your chambers this morning, laughing about how you were going to put the old woman away." Tobias turned back to Kowalski, who had released Beatrice and was backing away, his face draining of color. Tobias stepped forward, closing the distance. "And you, Officer Kowalski, the one who likes to plant cocaine. We have the dashcam footage you thought you deleted. We recovered it from the cloud server you didn't know existed." Beatrice looked at the man. "Tobias?" she whispered. Tobias's face softened instantly. He stepped past Kowalski, as if he were trash on the sidewalk, and wrapped his arms around his mother. "I'm here, Mama. I'm sorry I'm late. I had to get the warrant signed." He looked back at the judge, his eyes hardening again. "Nobody leaves this room," Tobias commanded. "Agent Miller, Agent Chen, arrest the judge. Agent Ross, cuff Officer Kowalski. Use his own cuffs. I want him to feel it." The silence that had fallen over courtroom 4B was replaced by a chaotic symphony of panic. It was the sound of absolute power crumbling in real time. Judge Arthur Mulholland, a man who had treated the Presidio County Courthouse as his personal fiefdom for 20 years, was now clinging to his bench like a captain on a sinking ship. His face, usually flushed with arrogance, had turned a sickly shade of grey. "This is madness!" Mulholland shrieked, his voice cracking. "Bailiff! Deputy Miller, do your job! Arrest these men!" Deputy Miller, the man who had laughed when Beatrice asked for a phone call, looked at the FBI agents. He looked at the assault rifles leveled at his chest. He looked at Tobias Washington, who radiated an aura of command that made the local sheriff look like a mall cop. Miller slowly unbuckled his gun belt. He let it drop to the floor with a heavy clatter. "I'm not getting shot for you, Arthur," Miller muttered, raising his hands. "Traitor!" Mulholland screamed. "I made you, and now you're going to unmake him," Tobias said, stepping up onto the raised platform of the judge's bench. It was a violation of every protocol in the book, but Tobias didn't care. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was a hostile takeover. Tobias leaned over the heavy oak desk, staring down at the judge. Up close, Mulholland smelled of stale coffee and fear. "Stand up," Tobias ordered. "I am a terrifyingly powerful man in this county," Mulholland hissed, though he remained seated. "I play golf with the governor. I have dinner with the senator. You arrest me, and your career is over, boy." Tobias smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had cornered a rabbit. "Arthur." "The governor signed the warrant," Tobias whispered, loud enough for only the judge to hear. "And the senator? He's the one who tipped us off about your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They fed you to us to save themselves." The color drained from Mulholland's face completely. The realization hit him. He wasn't protected. He was the scapegoat. "Agent Chen," Tobias snapped. "Get him out of that robe. He doesn't deserve to wear it." Agent Chen, a sharp-eyed woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, moved in. She didn't ask nicely. She grabbed the collar of the black judicial robe and yanked. The zipper tore. Mulholland flailed, looking like a turtle flipped on its back as the symbol of his authority was stripped from his body. Underneath, he was just a paunchy old man in a sweat-stained dress shirt. "Cuff him," Tobias said, "and make sure it's tight." As the steel cuffs clicked around the judge's wrists, a roar of protest erupted from the gallery. The off-duty officers, Kowalski's friends, had finally shaken off their shock. "You can't do this!" one burly officer shouted, standing up. "This is a setup." "Sit down!" Agent Ross barked, swinging the barrel of his rifle toward the gallery. "Federal agents have secured the exits. Anyone who moves is getting obstruction of justice added to their file." In the chaos, Officer Greg Kowalski saw his window. While Tobias was focused on the judge and the other agents were controlling the crowd, Kowalski made a move. He wasn't going for his gun. He knew that was suicide. He lunged for the side door, the one reserved for the jury. He made it 3 steps. Tobias didn't even turn around. He simply extended his leg in a sweeping arc. It was a move from his days in the Academy's defensive tactics unit. His heel connected with Kowalski's shin. Kowalski went down with a grunt, face-planting onto the hard linoleum floor. Before he could scramble up, Tobias's size 13 shoe was pressed firmly between his shoulder blades, pinning him to the ground. "Going somewhere, Greg?" Tobias asked calmly, adjusting his cufflinks. "Get off me!" Kowalski spat, his face pressed against the floor where Beatrice had stood only moments before. "I didn't do anything. She had drugs." Tobias applied more pressure. Kowalski wheezed. "Mom!" Tobias called out, his voice softening instantly. "Come here, please." Beatrice, who had been watching the scene with her hands covering her mouth, slowly walked over. She looked at her son, her Tobias, who used to cry when he scraped his knee, now towering over the men who had terrorized her. "Tobias," she wept. "Is it really over?" Tobias reached down, grabbed Kowalski by the back of his tactical vest, and hauled him to his knees. He forced the corrupt officer to look up at Beatrice. "Look at her," Tobias commanded. "Look at the woman you laughed at. Look at the woman you called a criminal." Kowalski refused to make eye contact. He stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. "Officer Kowalski," Tobias said, his voice echoing in the room, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to distribute narcotics, falsification of evidence, deprivation of rights under color of law, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. But honestly, I hope you keep talking. Every word you say just digs the hole deeper." Agent Ross moved in and handcuffed Kowalski. As they dragged him toward the defense table, pushing him into the seat Beatrice had occupied, the public defender, Mr. Pinsky, tried to sneak away. He was crawling under the tables toward the exit. "Mr. Pinsky," Tobias said, without looking, "stay right where you are. You're not under arrest yet, but your incompetence is so criminal it should be a felony. You're going to be a witness." Pinsky froze, then slowly sat up, looking like a frightened rabbit. The prosecutor, Thomas Reed, was the only one left standing. He was a smart man, a survivor. He saw the writing on the wall. He adjusted his tie, plastered a fake smile on his face, and walked toward Tobias with his hand extended. "Agent Washington," Reed said smoothly. "I have to say, impressive entrance." Of course, the district attorney's office had no idea about the corruption in the police force. "We were misled by Officer Kowalski. I'm fully prepared to cooperate with your investigation against the judge and the officer." Tobias looked at the prosecutor's hand. He didn't take it. He stared at Reed until the man's smile faltered and died. "Thomas Reed," Tobias said, "you prosecuted 300 cases in the last 2 years based on Kowalski's arrests. 300. And in every single one, the body cam footage was corrupted or lost. You didn't know? Or did you just not care because it padded your conviction rate for your upcoming run for mayor?" Reed's face twitched. "Now hold on. You can't prove intent." "I don't have to prove intent," Tobias said, pulling a USB drive from his pocket. "I just have to play the tapes." Tobias turned to the courtroom clerk, a young woman who looked terrified. "Miss, please connect this to the courtroom projector. We're going to have a little movie night." "Yes, sir," she squeaked, scrambling to obey. "Everybody sit down," Tobias ordered the room. "The show is just starting." The blinds were drawn, the lights were dimmed, the Presidio County courtroom, usually a place of lies, was about to be flooded with the blinding light of truth. Beatrice sat in the front row now, a cup of water in her hand, provided by one of the FBI agents. Tobias stood by the projector screen, looking like a professor about to deliver a lecture on the anatomy of corruption. Judge Mulholland and Officer Kowalski sat at the defense table, handcuffed to the chairs. Prosecutor Reed sat separately, sweating profusely. "Most criminals," Tobias began, addressing the room, "make the mistake of thinking they are smarter than the technology they use. Officer Kowalski, you use a standard-issue Axon Body 3 camera, correct?" Kowalski grunted, staring at the table. "The Axon Body 3 has a fail-safe," Tobias explained. "Even when you manually delete a file from the local storage, a backup cache is retained on the device's internal hard drive for exactly 7 days before it is overwritten. You arrested my mother 3 days ago. You thought you deleted the footage of the stop. You thought you wiped the slate clean." Tobias nodded to the clerk. "Hit play." The large screen flickered to life. The timestamp read, Tuesday, 1:14 p.m. The video was shaky at first, showing the steering wheel of Kowalski's cruiser. Then, the audio kicked in. "Target in sight!" Kowalski's voice came through the speakers, loud and clear. Black female, elderly, late model Camry. Looks like an easy mark. A gasp went through the courtroom. Beatrice put a hand to her chest. He had targeted her specifically because she looked vulnerable. The video showed the lights turning on, the pullover, the agonizing wait. Then, the interaction. The audience watched in silence as Kowalski bullied Beatrice. They heard her polite, trembling voice. They heard his aggression. Then came the moment of the plant. On the big screen, it was undeniable. Kowalski had his body turned slightly. His hand went to his vest. He pulled out the baggie. He tossed it onto the seat. "Gotcha," the recording of Kowalski whispered. In the courtroom, the real Kowalski closed his eyes. It was over. The video was clear as day. "But that's just bad policing," Tobias said, his voice cutting through the tension. "That gets you fired. Maybe a year in jail. But we aren't here for bad policing. We're here for the conspiracy." Tobias gestured for the next clip. "This," Tobias said, pointing to the judge, "is a recording from a bug we placed in Judge Mulholland's chambers 2 weeks ago. You see, the judge has a very interesting business partner." The screen remained black, but the audio played. It was the distinct, gravelly voice of Judge Arthur Mulholland. "I'm telling you, the census is down. The warden at Presidio Private Correctional is breathing down my neck. They need 50 more heads by the end of the quarter, or they lose their state funding grant." A second voice on the tape spoke. It was Prosecutor Thomas Reed. "I can't just manufacture felonies, Arthur. The public defenders are starting to ask questions." "Screw the public defenders," Mulholland's voice snarled. "Get Kowalski and the boys on the highway. Target out-of-towners, people who can't make bail, people who don't have connections. Just get me the bodies, Thomas. I need the kickback check to clear before my wife sees the credit card bill." The courtroom erupted. It wasn't just gasps this time. It was shouts of anger. Even the other police officers in the back looked disgusted. They were corrupt, sure, but this was selling human lives for profit. It was a meat grinder. Thomas Reed stood up, knocking his chair over. That's out of context. That's inadmissible. You didn't have a warrant for that." "FISA warrant," Tobias said calmly. "Federal Intelligence Surveillance Act, signed by a federal judge. It's admissible, Thomas. It's all admissible." Tobias walked over to the defense table. He leaned in, close to Mulholland. "You sentenced my mother to 5 years," Tobias said softly. "Do you know why? Because she was number 49. You needed one more body to hit your quota for the warden." Mulholland was shaking. Tears were streaming down his face. I didn't know she was your mother. I didn't know." "That's the problem, Arthur," Tobias said, his voice rising to a roar. "You shouldn't have to know who she is to treat her like a human being." The raw power of Tobias's anger silenced the room again. He composed himself, straightening his jacket. "We traced the money," Tobias continued, turning to the audience. "Judge Mulholland has received $1.2 million in consulting fees from the holding company that owns the local prison. Prosecutor Reed has received $400,000 in campaign donations from shell companies linked to the same prison. And Officer Kowalski? He gets a $500 bonus for every drug arrest that results in a prison sentence." Tobias looked at Kowalski. $500. You were going to ruin my mother's life for $500. Kowalski looked small. The bully was gone. In his place was a pathetic man realizing he had sold his soul for change. "But here is the twist," Tobias said, signaling the clerk for one final image. A document appeared on the screen. It was a medical report. Officer Kowalski claimed my mother swung at him. He claimed she was physically combative. This is my mother's medical file from Mercy General. She has severe rheumatoid arthritis in both shoulders. Her range of motion is limited to 40 degrees. Physically, she cannot lift her arm to swing at anyone. Tobias turned to the public defender, Pinsky. "Mr. Pinsky, did you read her medical file?" Pinsky stammered. I didn't have time. The docket was full." "You didn't look," Tobias corrected, "because you're part of the machine, too. You process them, they lock them up. Everyone gets paid, but the victim." Tobias walked back to his mother. He took her hand and helped her stand up. Officer Kowalski planted the drugs. The judge ordered the quota. The prosecutor facilitated the railroad. And they all laughed about it. Tobias looked at the FBI agents guarding the prisoners. "Get them out of here," Tobias ordered. "Booking is waiting, and put them in the general population holding cells. I want them to meet the people they put there." "No!" Mulholland screamed as they hauled him up. "You can't put me in Gen Pop. They'll kill me. I'm a judge." "You're not a judge anymore, Arthur," Tobias said coldly. "You're just another inmate. Number 50. As the three men, the judge, the prosecutor, and the cop, were dragged out of the courtroom in a line of shame, the gallery was silent. There was no laughter now. There were no smirks. Beatrice squeezed her son's hand. "Tobias," she whispered, "you saved me." Tobias looked down at her, his eyes wet. "No, Mama. You raised me. I just did what you taught me. I fought for what was right." But the story wasn't over. The arrest was just the beginning of the storm. The real fallout was about to hit the entire county, and secrets buried for decades were about to claw their way to the surface. The ride to Presidio Private Correctional was a 40-minute journey into hell for the three men shackled in the back of the armored transport van. For years, Judge Arthur Mulholland, Prosecutor Thomas Reed, and Officer Greg Kowalski had sent thousands of people on this exact trip. They had signed the papers, stamped the forms, and made the jokes. They knew the route by heart, but they had never felt the suspensionless metal bench slamming against their spines with every pothole. They had never smelled the mixture of old sweat, urine, and industrial cleaner that permeated the steel cage. "My hands are numb," Judge Mulholland whined, shifting uncomfortably. The zip ties Agent Ross had applied were biting into his wrists. "This is a violation of my civil rights. I need to call the governor." "Shut up, Arthur," Kowalski growled from the corner. The officer was staring at the floor, his eyes hollow. "The governor isn't picking up. Nobody is picking up." "We just need to talk to Warden Hatcher," Reed stammered, his legal mind trying to find a loophole that didn't exist. "Hatcher is our guy. We made him millions. He'll put us in protective custody, the VIP wing. We'll be out on bail in 24 hours. The van screeched to a halt. The back doors flew open, revealing the imposing razor-wire fences of the facility they had helped populate. But instead of the deferential treatment they expected, they were met by a team of tactical guards wearing face masks. These weren't the local deputies they drank beer with. These were federal contractors brought in by the FBI to secure the facility during the raid. "Out!" a guard shouted. "Move it! Face the wall!" They were dragged out, stumbling in the gravel. There was no VIP wing. There was no protective custody. Tobias Washington had ensured that their processing paperwork was flagged with a specific code: general population, high-risk flight risk. They were stripped of their expensive suits. Mulholland stood shivering in his underwear, his paunch sagging, stripped of the robe that had been his armor. They were sprayed with delousing foam, forced to squat and cough, and handed bright orange jumpsuits that smelled of mildew. "Name?" The intake officer barked at Mulholland. "Judge Arthur Mulholland," he said, trying to summon a shred of dignity. "I don't see a title here," the officer said, typing slowly. "I see inmate, 8940. Move along." They were marched through the cell block. It was colloquially known as the Pit. It was an open-tier system where the noise was deafening, shouts, banging on bars, and the low, menacing hum of hundreds of men who had nothing left to lose. As the 3 men were paraded down the center walkway, the shouting stopped. It was replaced by a silence that was far more terrifying. Then, a voice rang out from a cell on the 2nd tier. "Hey, is that Officer Gregg?" The silence broke. "It is. It's the pig. And look, it's the hanging judge." The block erupted. Jeers, trash, and cups of liquid rained down on them. These were men who had been framed, over-sentenced, and ignored by the very trio now shuffling in shackles below them. "You're dead, Mulholland," someone screamed. "I got 20 years for a first offense because of you." The guard shoved them into a holding cell at the end of the block. It was designed for 2 men. There were 3 of them. "We can't stay here," Reed hyperventilated, clawing at the bars. "They know who we are. They'll kill us." "You should have thought of that when you denied their appeals," a voice said from the shadows. Warden Hatcher appeared outside the cell. He looked disheveled. He was carrying a box of his personal belongings. "Hatcher," Mulholland gasped, rushing to the bars. "Thank God! Get us out of here! Call the secret line!" Warden Hatcher looked at the judge with pure contempt. "There is no secret line, Arthur. The FBI froze the accounts an hour ago. They seized the operating logs. I'm being indicted for fraud and human trafficking." "But we're partners!" Reed cried. "We aren't partners," Hatcher spat. "You're the reason I'm going down. Your greed got sloppy. You needed one more body, right? You just had to arrest the mother of an FBI section chief." Hatcher turned to walk away, flanked by 2 federal agents. "Wait!" Kowalski yelled. "What happens to us?" Hatcher paused and looked back, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Well, since the prison is now under federal management, I don't make the rules. But I hear the cafeteria is serving that meatloaf you guys always cut the budget for. Bon appétit." Hatcher walked away, leaving them alone in the belly of the beast they had created. That night, the reality of their hard karma set in. Kowalski was the first to break. Around 2:00 a.m., the cell door buzzed open. A large man was shoved inside, a temporary transfer due to overcrowding. The man was massive, with tattoos covering his neck and arms. He looked at the 3 men in orange, then focused his gaze on Kowalski. "Well, well," the man said, his voice like grinding stones. "If it isn't Officer Gregg." Kowalski scrambled back against the wall. "I don't know you." "Sure you do." The man smiled, revealing a gold tooth. 3 years ago, you pulled me over in front of my daughter's school. You said I had a weapon. I didn't. You put a throwdown piece in my glove box. My little girl watched me get tasered." "Terrence?" Kowalski whispered, the name coming back to him. "Big T," the man corrected. He cracked his knuckles. "I lost my job. I lost my house. My wife left me because she thought I was a thug. You took my life apart, brick by brick." Big T stepped forward. The guards were suspiciously absent from their rounds. "I'm not going to kill you, Gregg," Big T whispered, looming over him. "That's too easy. But every time you close your eyes in here, I'm going to be there. You're going to live in fear, just like my little girl did." Kowalski began to sob. It was the ugly, desperate sobbing of a bully who had finally met a force he couldn't intimidate. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the world was learning the truth. The Washington effect, as the media dubbed it, was sweeping the state. Tobias had released the body cam footage and the audio tapes to the press. The story was everywhere. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, the New York Times. The price of justice, how one grandmother toppled a corrupt empire. Beatrice sat in her living room, her arm in a sling. Her arthritis had flared up from the stress, watching the news. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. "Mama, you okay?" Tobias asked, walking in with 2 cups of tea. He had taken leave to stay with her. "They're saying such terrible things about them," Beatrice said softly. "I almost feel sorry for them." "Don't," Tobias said firmly, setting the tea down. "Save your pity for the people who didn't have a son in the FBI. Think about the people who are still in that prison because nobody came for them." He handed her a tablet. "Look at this." It was a GoFundMe page set up by a stranger in Ohio. Justice for Beatrice and the victims of Presidio County. It had been live for 6 hours. It had raised $4 million. "This isn't for me." Beatrice shook her head. "I don't need this." "I know." Tobias smiled. "That's why we're going to use it to hire the best civil rights lawyers in the country. We're going to reopen every single case Mulholland ever touched. We're going to free them all, Mama." Beatrice looked at the screen, tears welling in her eyes. It was the first time she realized that her suffering hadn't been in vain. It was the spark for a revolution. 6 months later, the federal trial of United States versus Mulholland, Reed and Kowalski began. It wasn't held in the corrupt Presidio County Courthouse. It was held in the Federal District Court in the state capital, a building of cold marble and unforgiving acoustics. The presiding judge was practically a legend, the Honorable Judge Sarah Sterling. She was known as the Iron Lady of the Federal Circuit. She didn't care about golf buddies or political favors. She cared about the Constitution, and she hated public corruption with a fiery passion. The courtroom was packed, not with cronies but with victims. Hundreds of families who had been torn apart by the trio's schemes filled the gallery, the overflow rooms, and the steps outside. Tobias Washington sat in the front row next to his mother. He wasn't the prosecutor. That conflict of interest would have been too high. But he was the star witness. The trial lasted 3 weeks. It was a massacre. The defense attorneys for Mulholland and Reed tried to argue that the audio tapes were misinterpreted, that the quotas were just administrative goals. Judge Sterling wasn't having it. "Mr. Defense Counsel," Judge Sterling interrupted during opening statements, "are you suggesting that one more body for the payroll is a standard administrative term for judicial efficiency?" "Well, in context," the lawyer stammered. "The context is slavery, Counselor," Sterling snapped. "Move on." The most damaging testimony didn't come from Tobias, however. It came from an unexpected source. On the 10th day, the prosecution called their surprise witness, Mrs. Evelyn Mulholland, the judge's wife. Arthur Mulholland, who had been sitting stoically at the defense table, went pale. He stood up. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" "Sit down, defendant," the marshal barked. Evelyn Mulholland took the stand. She looked 10 years younger than she had 6 months ago. She wasn't wearing her usual diamonds. She was dressed simply. "Mrs. Mulholland," the federal prosecutor asked, "can you tell the jury about the safe in your husband's study?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady. She avoided looking at her husband. Arthur kept a ledger. He thought I didn't know the combination. But I did. It listed every bribe, every payout, and every name of the people he framed. "Why are you coming forward now?" Evelyn looked at Beatrice Washington in the front row. "Because I watched the video," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "I saw him laugh at that woman. And I realized he's been laughing at me too. He gambled away our savings. He mortgaged our house to pay off debts to the mob, all while pretending to be a pillar of the community. He is a monster." Arthur Mulholland slumped in his chair. It was the final nail. His own greed had alienated the only person who might have stood by him. When the verdict came, it was swift. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. "We find the defendant," Arthur Mulholland, guilty on all 47 counts of racketeering, wire fraud, and deprivation of rights. We find the defendant, Thomas Reed, guilty. We find the defendant, Greg Kowalski, guilty. The sentencing hearing was scheduled immediately. Judge Sterling didn't believe in delays. She looked at the three men standing before her. They looked broken. Prison had been unkind to them. Mulholland had lost 40 pounds. Kowalski had a jagged scar on his cheek, a souvenir from Big T. Reed was twitching uncontrollably. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Sterling began, her voice echoing with righteous anger, "I have never seen such a grotesque abuse of power. You didn't just break the law, you weaponized it against the most vulnerable members of society. You turned a courthouse into a marketplace for human flesh." She turned to Kowalski. "Greg Kowalski, for betraying the badge and destroying lives for pocket change, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison." She turned to Reed. "Thomas Reed, for selling your prosecutorial discretion to the highest bidder, I sentence you to 30 years. She turned to Mulholland. "And you," she said, her eyes narrowing, "the ringleader. You sat in a chair of judgment and acted like a god. You thought you were untouchable." "Please, Your Honor," Mulholland wept, his hands shaking. "I'm an old man. Any sentence is a death sentence." "Then you should have thought about that before you stole the lives of young men and women who will never get that time back," Sterling replied coldly. "Arthur Mulholland, I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, under the RICO statutes, the government is seizing all of your assets, your homes, your pensions, your offshore accounts." She banged her gavel. The sound was like a thunder crack clearing the air after a long storm. "Get them out of my sight." As the marshals dragged them away, Mulholland screaming, Reed sobbing, Kowalski silent, the gallery erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping, it was a roar of liberation. Outside the courthouse, the scene was jubilant. Reporters shoved microphones in Beatrice's face. "Mrs. Washington, Mrs. Washington, how do you feel?" Beatrice stood tall. Her arthritis still hurt, but she didn't feel it today. She looked at the cameras, then at her son, Tobias. "I feel," she said, her voice strong and clear, "like the system finally worked. But only because we made it work. Don't let them tell you you're powerless. God is watching, and sometimes he sends the FBI." The crowd laughed and cheered. The Presidio County Courthouse was under new management. The new judge was a former public defender who insisted on fairness above all else. Tobias Washington had been promoted to Deputy Assistant Director. He was currently leading a national task force to root out corruption in small-town judicial systems. They called it the Beatrice Initiative. But the best part of the story happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Beatrice was in her kitchen, pulling a peach cobbler out of the oven. The doorbell rang. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. Standing there was a young man, maybe 25. He looked nervous. He was holding a bouquet of flowers. "Mrs. Washington?" he asked. "Yes, baby?" "My name is Marcus. I was in Presidio Correctional. I was doing 10 years for a robbery I didn't commit. Judge Mulholland sentenced me." Beatrice nodded, listening. "Your son's team, they got my case reviewed. I was released yesterday. I wanted to say thank you. If you hadn't stood up to them, I'd still be in that cage." Beatrice smiled, the warm, radiant smile that had survived the darkest cells. She opened the screen door. "Come on in, Marcus," she said. "The cobbler is hot, and Tobias is just setting the table. You're just in time for Sunday dinner." Karma had come for the wicked, violent, and swift. But for the righteous, there was peace, there was justice, and there was peach cobbler. And that is how one corrupt judge, a greedy prosecutor, and a dirty cop learned the hardest lesson of their lives. You never know who you are messing with. They tried to bury Beatrice Washington, but they didn't know she was a seed. Today, Arthur Mulholland is rotting in a cell, serving a life sentence among the very men he wrongfully convicted, while Beatrice and her son Tobias have helped free over 200 innocent people through their initiative. It's a powerful reminder that while the wheels of justice turn slowly, with enough courage and a high-ranking FBI son, they grind exceedingly fine. If this story satisfied your need for justice, smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story about karma hitting back. What would you have done if you were Beatrice? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.